All right. Welcome, welcome. Just going to give it a minute here while our room fills up. Looking at our attendee count going up, but glad to see that people are taking time out of their day today to join us for a great webinar. It's beautiful here in New Jersey if you like overcast skies, but the weather's nice and warm, so looking forward to some sunshine later on at the end of the week. I'm Melissa Prusher, Vice President of Global Marketing for Avaap, here to welcome you today. Really appreciate, like I said, everybody who took time out of their day to join us. We have a fabulous session on the agenda. Today's session is Healthcare ERP System Selection. So it's going to be led by Avaap's Advisory Vice President, Tim Oberschlake, and we'll be joined by LCMC Health CIO, Tanya Townsend. I know everybody's super familiar with Zoom. We've been Zooming for a year, but before we get started, I just want to let you know that there is a Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. It's there where you could put your questions in. We'll do our best to answer them at the end of today's session, but feel free, as things come up that you've got an inquiry on, go ahead and drop a question into the Q&A. We also have a brief survey at the end of today's session. It'll take less than a minute, so if you could complete that upon your exiting, we would greatly appreciate it. Everyone who's on today's call will get delivered right to their inbox a copy of today's session, an on-demand version, so you can again replay it or share it with your team members. And we'll also post it to our website. That'll be posted in about 2 business days. So again, whether it's in your inbox or visiting avaap.com or contacting, me or our speakers at the end of today's session, happy to share our content with you. As many of you know, Avaap is an industry-focused cross-platform management and technology consulting firm specializing in enterprise applications and change management. So again, if you want to talk about, system selection in your organization or your business goals, at the end of today's session, we'll have our speaker contact information on the screen for you. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim and get right to the meat of today's presentation, Healthcare ERP System Selection. Tim, this is all you.
Great. Well, thanks, Melissa. We appreciate it. And thanks for everybody for joining us for the webinar. Tanya will be joining us here in just a couple of minutes. She's running from another meeting, as I'm sure all of you can appreciate. So we'll go ahead and dive in to the presentation at this point. So the bottom line is today we're going to be really talking about ERP system selection, as you saw from the title slide. The bottom line is we want to show a few stats going into this session. Why is this, why is this such a big deal? I mean, everyone's expecting the ERP market size to reach 2.1 billion in 2025. It's a growing market right now, and the bottom line is we need to make sure that as more and more people are turning to cloud ERP, that we actually, we rethink how we're doing that selection process going forward in the future. So let's go ahead and show you a few statistics. So in the healthcare market, you guys might be familiar with KLAS. They actually do a lot of analysis of the market in healthcare, specifically focusing in on direct feedback from customers who have went through either a selection process and implementation process. And it's not just limited to ERP, they do work with EHR systems, et cetera. So they try to give a full, spectrum of what the technology marketplace looks like in healthcare. So this is a slide that we found interesting, that we thought you all might find interesting as we start this presentation. You'll notice that purchase decisions over the last couple of years, and again, we won't spend a whole lot of time on this slide, but you can see Workday, Oracle are certainly leading the pack with Infor there as well. I think when you see that decided bar, it looks like Workday, about 2/3 probably of the decisions in the last couple of years were made in their favor, with Oracle and Infor probably split with the rest of them. But those tend to be the three major players when people are considering ERP decisions, purchase decisions going forward in the future. All right. So let's start with introductions. I'm going to quickly introduce myself, and we probably will go back to this when Tanya is able to join us. The bottom line is I've been in the industry for 33 plus years. That number keeps growing. I'm a vice president of Avaap Healthcare. 13 years plus CIO experience. I won't read through all that list of information, but I like to think when I'm working with my clients, I'm sort of doing it from a client perspective, since I have sat for a number of years in your all's shoes. It's not just being a consultant, it's actually understanding the client perspective. So hopefully we bring that to bear as we work with folks. But again, that's just sort of my background in a nutshell. And then Tanya, when she joins us, we'll let her do her introduction as well. But I did want to note that, Chime Board of Trustees, 20 plus years healthcare experience, 12 plus years as a CIO. So she has a lot of experience that she brings to the table as well to this discussion.
Yeah. Hey, Tim.
Hey,
Can you hear
Tanya.
me? Oh, okay.
Oh, there you are. Okay. You can do your own introduction now.
Okay, I wasn't sure if I was on the wrong link. So hi, I am here, but you did a great job introducing me. Hi. Thanks. I was able to join a little bit late.
Okay, well, thank you. All right, well, let's keep on going to the next slide here. So we're going to talk a little bit about the agenda. The focus here is what's really changed with system selections. There's a different mindset I think you have to go into selections now with cloud ERP systems out there. It's not the same as it was before, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail. We're going to talk specifically about LCMC Health and use that as a use case as we go through this discussion, and then talk about that new perspective on software selection. And then hopefully we'll leave some time at the end for some Q&A, and we'll go from there. All right, so look forward to this discussion. All right, so first of all, what's changed? Obviously, if you're looking at this picture, a lot has changed over the last 20, 30 years from a technology perspective, but what does that really mean from an ERP perspective? So when you look at things that have changed, really going from a legacy to a cloud ERP system is really a mindset change. You'll notice in the legacy system, a hospital would basically choose a system, let's say PeopleSoft or Lawson, back in the day. And the intent is they really wanted to customize that system to meet their requirements. So they usually had a laundry list of requirements, and they basically did all kinds of customizations to basically make sure that the hospital or the system did things the way that the hospital or systems do things in general. That was really the focus. It's making it, your own, so to speak. It's a little different in the cloud because the cloud vendors, you can actually configure the software. They're highly configurable, okay, but they're not customizable, and that's a big deal. But when you look at the big picture there, the bottom line is really, did we really want to customize those systems in the way we do journal entries in those previous systems? Probably not. We just didn't want to tackle the change associated with it. Okay, and what happens with cloud systems, it forces us to basically tackle, coming to a best practice business process across a system or a hospital. Because again, from a cloud perspective, you have to come to the software. The software is not going to come to you per se. So again, when we do that, we have to focus on what's strategic, not tactical. Give you an example. A lot of folks hiring the right people in a lot of cases, a lot of organizations consider that strategic. So there may be some, again, highly configurable part of Workday or Oracle Cloud that you may have to update to basically make sure, that you're getting the best candidates for you and you're meeting your specific requirements there. However, how you do a journal entry, how you process an invoice, there's nothing strategic about that. The way you do it versus any other hospital shouldn't really be that different. So again, going to a best practice business process with the cloud allows you to sort of tackle those changes, get everybody in the same path and move them forward. You're also, when you look at the difference here, is release cycles come, at a given clip. So in other words, Workday, every 6 months, you're going to get a new release of the software, whether you want it or not. Oracle Cloud, every 3 months, you're going to be getting, a new release of the software, whether you want it or not. Again, same thing, with Infor, with their Cloud Suite products, you're getting regular updates of the system. You really don't have the option of taking months or in some cases years to re-customize a system. So again, all along the same line that we really need to keep coming to a best practice, non-customized configurable system as we move to the cloud, okay? And building upon that, what does that mean with our new approach? Well, when we do an implementation, within a cloud product suite, the bottom line is, we're not looking to replicate what we did in the past. We're looking again for that vendor best practice business process. So we're really focusing, when we talk about selections, when we talk requirements, we're really focusing on the what needs to be done now instead of the how. And that's a big difference. One of the pet peeves I have is when I see an RFP out there that has a laundry list of requirements that actually are going into how you do business. You're basically just asking for a new system to come in to replicate what you do today. And I think that's limiting yourself on what you can actually get out of the system going forward. The other point that we have here is on leadership. The bottom line is the functional you're being functionally led in these projects nowadays versus being technically led. And that's a really big deal as well when it comes to selection, because you want to make sure that your functional leaders are part of the process. So again, unlike systems of the past, these systems are already built and they're configurable again, but the software is already there. So coming in, these implementations are iterative in nature. You get a prototype out there right away. Your functional, folks can be engaged right away. You don't have to go into a back room and design something and come back. That's a really big deal, when you're actually looking at your new system, because your functional folks have to not just be involved in the implementation, but they also have to be involved in the selection, making sure, that they're on board with that best practice business process that those vendors are bringing. From a people perspective, I say avoidance versus adoption here. Going to, again, the Workday or the Oracle Cloud way of doing business, or the Cloud Suite and Infor way of doing business, requires organizational change management. People have to adopt those new best practice business processes. You can't avoid them like you did in the past and just customize the system. And again, the future states, because the software is being utilized the same software is being utilized in a myriad of clients across the healthcare industry. The bottom line is, when you look at value assessments and success criteria, you don't have to do that in a theoretical way. You don't have to think about what are all those customizations going to look like and think about that in a theoretical perspective. You can actually go and look at value assessments that have been done at other organizations and wrap that actually into your business case. So that's a real big difference about how you approach selections as you move forward. Tanya, anything you wanted to add to that that we experienced on the LCMC project?
Nope, I think that's a really good background. I think in a little bit here, we'll talk a little bit more about LCMC Health, so I can play this into the conversation. Okay,
very good. All right, so let's talk about LCMC, and go ahead, Tanya, I'll give it off to you.
Sure. So thanks for your time today. But so LCMC Health, a little bit about us, stands for Louisiana Children's Medical Center. We're based out of New Orleans. Don't let the title kind of fool you though. So we've got one hospital is the Children's Hospital of New Orleans, and they're our founding member, which is why we keep the children's in our title. But we have 5 other hospitals, one being a large academic medical center, level 1 trauma unit, and 4 other adult community acute hospitals. So a very dynamic group of hospitals and coming together to form LCMC Health. So there's a lot of history. All of these hospitals have been within the community for a very long time. Lots of independence around how they made decisions for operations, for IT. And so that's what I've been doing the last 6 years or so, is bringing them together from an IT perspective. In the healthcare community, of course, we focused a lot over the last decade or so around the electronic health record implementation. That was key to doing things such as meaningful use and some of the other regulatory requirements. So that was a big focus for us. And now it's exciting to see the table now turn to focus on ERP that we haven't had maybe the time and quite the attention for, because we were busy with that. So this is really exciting to see this come together and form more standardization, consolidation around exactly what we did on the electronic health record side. So how do we bring together human resource management approaches, supply chain, finance, and kind of do that same thing, is bring this these entities together, form a new culture, come up with standard workflows, and replace what is now legacy systems that will very soon not be supported anymore. We do have currently 2 instances of Lawson, Infor Lawson. We also have an instance of Oracle's PeopleSoft, and they are all very, very different in terms of how they were built, how they're supported. So even if it's the same instance, it's kind of apples and oranges in terms of how they were built and how we utilize those systems. So as you can imagine, it's not exactly a seamless experience to manage all of those differences from an IT perspective, but it's also difficult for our workers to float across those platforms and have a seamless experience. So lots of gaps in functionality that have been kind of band-aided with third-party solutions. And again, not the same third party in those different instances. So we just have a ton of opportunity that we've been just kind of managing and keeping our head above water for the last several years. But this is really exciting that we have turned the corner. We did a very thorough business analysis, business case, which is what we're talking about today. And we've officially launched into our implementation. So excited to share the journey and the story with you.
Great. Thanks, Tanya. So let's talk a little bit about the actual selection process that we used at LCMC, and it's sort of a standard process, that we bring to bear here. You'll notice at the beginning, there's something called an organizational alignment. That, again, we'll talk in a little more detail about that. But the idea there is, let's get everybody together on the same page, as the first step of the process. Make sure we have a clear end in mind of what we're trying to get to as we move forward. And that sort of sets a foundation for everything else that you'll basically see on the screen. Now, the request for proposal or RFP creation usually comes next. In the case of LCMC, we didn't want to do a formal RFP. In some cases, folks will basically take some of these chevrons that you'll see here, and we may not do all of them. We may do pieces of them. Organizational alignment we feel is required. It sets the foundation. But again, each of these other chevrons, if you will, you can basically customize the process a bit to yourself depending upon what things you've done in preparation for the ERP selection. But in the case of LCMC, we actually did request proposals from each of the leading vendors, but we didn't do a formal RFP. From a vendor analysis and recommendation perspective, what we'll want to do there is actually take the scorecards that we created during the last phase, the request for proposal phase, and we actually analyze those proposals that have come in the door. We actually do demonstrations and analyze, all those demonstrations, reference calls, etc. That's that next chevron. A lot of folks, depending upon if you've already done a business case before we started or what have you, that business case is the next chevron. In the case of LCMC, again, we'll jump into some details around that later. But the bottom line is we did an extensive business case at LCMC. And one advantage, again, that we mentioned earlier is there is an advantage in the Cloud Suite products because most of these vendors have value assessment teams that have actually measured the value that the software is actually delivered to different clients. And since you'll be getting the same exact software, obviously it has to be applied to your organization. But again, a lot of that, the value assessments can actually be applied in your business case to actually get, some real good, TCO and ROI numbers out for your executive team. The next chevron you'll see is negotiating contracting. Again, we'll go through in detail what this looks like, but, that's one of those chevrons that, again, we typically do that in our selection processes because a lot of times folks, if they don't do these negotiations all the time, they may not know, what standard prices are for the different vendors, et cetera. But again, that's stuff that we can bring to bear. And then the pre-implementation activities are those things that get us ready for the implementation of Workday, Oracle Cloud, or Infor Cloud Suite. A lot of times that'll be standardizing some processes or really looking at the people, process, and technology aspects of an organization to see if they're ready, and then mitigating some of those gaps as we get ready for an implementation. So that's really the process at a really high level. And now we'll dig a little more into the detail. So first of all, we have enterprise program management. The bottom line is, here we want to make sure there's a solid foundation built, across all the chevrons you saw. And that starts with making sure that we have a solid steering committee, to make sure that we have a way of communicating to that steering committee. We have functional SMEs involved in the process. And we're basically just managing this program as we move forward. So again, regardless of the selection that's done and which chevrons someone would choose to go through, enterprise program management obviously holds all of that together. And then on the organizational alignment, the bottom line is, we'll dig a little deeper here. That really is making sure that all your stakeholders at the end of the day, once we've actually went through the process of figuring out what you're trying to accomplish, what your objectives are, what the vision is, all that kind of good stuff. The bottom line is, we actually will run that, the team that helped put all that together will actually run that by the key stakeholders and basically make sure that everyone can live with and support, the project that's set in front of us. So again, I won't read through everything that's on this list, but if you take anything away from this session, I think the bottom line is this organizational alignment, beginning with the end in mind, making sure you have your objectives, your strategic intent, your measurable success factors laid out is of vital importance. So in the case of LCMC, Tanya, I know that the selection team that we had out there actually presented the findings of organizational alignment to the steering committee. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe go into the strategic intents on the next slide?
Sure. Why don't you go ahead and go to the next slide?
Okay.
So yes, we did have a very comprehensive and I feel like something to be proud of process on getting the buy-in and having everyone have a voice around what is it that we're trying to accomplish and what are we really looking for in that business case. So that was extremely comprehensive and very thorough. Great partnership with Avaap on that one. And this is kind of the strategic intent that was our guiding principles, so to speak, in terms of building that business case and understanding what that future would look like. So the first step, and I like to say this is one of my mantras, but continuous optimization. So don't let perfection get in the way of good in terms of keeping the momentum going. So as I like to say with all of our IT implementations, the go live is only the beginning. It definitely is something that we will continuously improve. And so go into that with mind. So we're not going to boil the ocean on day one. We really need to get up and running quickly with our core concepts supported, and then understand it's a continuous evolution. Understand that mergers and acquisitions are probably not going to stop. That's going to be an ongoing conversation, particularly in healthcare. So build with that end in mind of whatever we design needs to be able to accommodate future growth. this is something maybe unique to us, but we call it guided autonomy. So even though we are 6 hospitals coming together on a journey towards systemness and alignment and trying to create a new culture, each hospital does have something unique. So we have pediatrics versus trauma versus different service line expertise. So understanding that there is some guided autonomy around that. So we're not going to just say no to certain requests. It's not 100% standardized, but the core is standardized, but understanding there might be some uniqueness. And then of course, I'm not going to read through all of these, but understanding that we do have an opportunity to save money, particularly when we start to rationalize and consolidate some of these systems. So understanding there's financial responsibility. We are moving to the cloud. We currently are on premise with our Lawson implementation. So this is new as we move to a cloud-based infrastructure for resilience in terms of disaster recovery, particularly given the hurricane season we had this past year. And then again, movement towards the systemness, highly integrated health system. Again, kind of start with that end in mind, but data, we have learned even through the electronic health record implementation that data is so important. So let's make sure we're talking about that during the implementation. How are we going to be measuring results? What are the key performance indicators that we can start to measure now in a baseline format and then continuously measure throughout the implementation and beyond, and ensuring that we are being transparent and hopefully celebrating our results because we're focusing on that and getting the efficiencies. And then we have huge opportunity to just enhance our whole employee experience around talent management. So currently it's not the most robust experience with our current tools. And that's something that's important. Not only patients are important to us, but our employees are important to us. And how do we make sure we build the system to enhance their experience and make that more efficient and successful? This is the tagline we came up with for the implementation: one heart, one solution. Again, we want to put our people and quality first, supporting that collaborative culture, looking for operational efficiencies, ensuring we have real-time accurate information, and really empower our workforce as we move forward. So this is where we're at. So we have completed these major steps in the business case. So we created the strategic imperatives that I just mentioned. We've started to outline our program objectives that we will measure throughout the implementation and beyond, and created those success factors that we have already started to share. So we recently introduced a project status report that is shared with our executive team. And that's exactly the focus on that report, is not just, how's the project going, green, yellow, red, but let's celebrate the successes that we're having and how we're measuring those along the way. And so far, that's been a big hit.
Okay, when we get to this, that was the phase 1 of the implementation, is sort of that, that organizational alignment and some of the results that came out of that. I think the phase 2, that second chevron, if you will, the proposals and RFP creation, the bottom line is, everybody sort of knows what's in an RFP. I think the key here is to make sure that what we're putting in there, again, is not sharing the how to do things, but sharing the what needs to be done. So what are the required business processes? Let's prioritize those. That's, how are we going to measure the responses, et cetera. So again, I won't read through all this, but, making sure that, that we actually are, in addition to actually sending out the proposal request, we're actually laying the foundation for how we're going to measure the proposals once they actually come in. How are we going to score those? What is the selection criteria needed, et cetera. All that stuff is going to be determined in this phase, and make sure that we're ready, as we move forward. Okay. And here you'll see, some selection criteria that was out there. So then, typical things you'll see: ability to meet requirements, product presentations, tech architecture. But you're going to actually go through all of this And what we did was we assigned max points to it. Behind that, you see to the right, we have details. And again, in this case, in the core HR, ability to perform a certain business process. Again, we didn't get into the specifics of how that business process was done. We'll let those vendors come to us and show us how that's going to happen in their system. But the fact that it has to happen is sort of highlighted. But again, all of the scoring tools and criteria is set up in advance, to make sure that we're all set as we move forward. Okay. Now, from a phase 3 perspective, once we actually get into the vendor analysis and framework, again, we follow this 8-step process, if you will, as we go through it. I mean, obviously, we have to read and evaluate the proposals, determine the finalists, conduct demos, et cetera. Because we actually shortlisted, to 3 vendors at the beginning, we really didn't weed anyone out, if you will, in step 2. So we conducted the demonstrations, across all 3 vendors, and then we did reference calls, the TCO, et cetera. And then finalize those recommendations. So again, we've touched on each of these steps in the process at LCMC. I think some of these we sort of, maybe did a little out of order, which is fine. But the bottom line is each of these sort of steps were touched on. So Tanya, any comments, I guess, on the demos, the analysis and recommendations, the selection criteria, and some of that we've went through here and how you guys did it at LCMC?
Yeah, my only additional comment, because I feel obligated to share lessons learned along the way too. Sure. My only thing would be just a reminder, or if you're approaching a similar process, to keep in mind what it takes to do the transition. So you have to keep the wheels on, keeps the lights on your current infrastructure, current system, while you are paying, purchasing, and implementing your new system. Even if you do go, like in our case, if we had gone from Lawson to Infor, they really are 2 different platforms, 2 different systems. So it's the same approach, even if you are kind of upgrading your existing environment. So just something to keep in mind when you're doing that total cost of ownership is understanding there's probably a year or 2 where you're almost double paying for both systems. But keep that in mind.
Good advice. All right, so one of the things we have here also is all that analysis that we're getting and that we do is sort of feeding, as Tanya was talking about, it's feeding that, what is that operating cost model going to look like going forward? What's that capital cost model? What are the potential savings? So part of the analysis and recommendation is to gather that information and feed it into a model. And again, then in phase 4, we actually do the business case development. And again, you're going to see a lot of the objectives here of what a business case should have in it. I think, Tanya, at LCMC, we spent a lot of time on the business case, making sure it was ready for the executive team. And we did several iterations of this. Maybe any lessons learned or any thoughts on the business case and what people should be doing going forward with this?
Yeah, I would say that the toughest part about this whole process was trying to baseline the current state. So when you are looking at the qualitative savings, that's difficult to measure in a metrics standpoint. So that was probably the biggest challenge, is trying to baseline what you feel your existing opportunity is at, and then selling the how you're going to truly prove those anticipated results. That was probably the trickiest part, and still is. And we've only just begun our implementation, so that will continue to be a challenge to really do the before, during, and after measurements.
And I think as a result of that, I think some of the numbers we put in there were extremely conservative because we didn't want to overcommit in the business case, right? At the end of the day, we wanted to make sure that we dialed that back. But even with that, there's still always a question, even though it's been proven at X and X institution through those value assessments, how does it apply to LCMC, right? Is the key question.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So the next phase we have is negotiation and contracting. And it's interesting because in this phase, we really break things down into two different stages, if you will. One is what we'll call strategic negotiations, and the other is tactical. Now, strategic negotiations are those things that, if we don't get these resolved, the deal's not going to get done, and we may have to go to the alternate vendor. Now, that could be, a lot of different things. Reading into that, I think in the case of LCMC, I don't think we had a whole lot on the strategic negotiation side of the fence, because we did so much work on the business case, and so much work in the vendor analysis and demonstrations, that when we got to strategic negotiations, really, it was just making sure that we're on the same page with the selected vendor of what we were trying to do from an objective perspective. And I think we were pretty close there anyway. That phase two, technical negotiations, took a little more work. And really there, legal terms and conditions, business terms and conditions, and even in preparation for that, making sure that we actually went through and we had to basically do a couple extra demonstrations on certain products to say, are they in, are they out, those type of things. And once everything was settled, if you will, and I had the I's dotted, T's crossed, then getting that best and final offer so that we could actually get final contracts moved through. So again, I'll stop there. Tanya, any feedback on that process from an executive lens?
Hopefully you're okay with me talking about this, Tim, but I would say the other thing to keep in mind during the TCO negotiations and contracting is with any of the top vendors that we're talking about, they require you to have an implementation partner, and which is of course Avaap for us. So that's just the other piece when you're having these exact same conversations around these phases. Understand that that's a huge part of the negotiation too, is who you choose with your implementation partner and take the same approach.
Absolutely. Exactly. So we actually helped LCMC out with the software negotiations, and then the same process I think we used, for software, then they used that on us from an implementation perspective. So yeah, we went through both of those at the same time. So good point. All right, so let's go to the phase 6, the pre-implementation. And in this one, really, the work we did at LCMC was probably a little bit more than maybe you see at a lot of other sites, because as Tanya talked about, we're coming from 3 different instances of the software, an East Bank, a West Bank, Lawson, a PeopleSoft. So there's 3 instances of the ERP software. So getting folks, on the same page with, the job architecture, for example, getting people on the same page with item master consolidation across at least the Lawson instances, as part of that, getting doing a change management strategy to make sure there was a firm foundation for the people side of the change. A BI assessment was done, which, we're still finishing some discussions there about the implementation of that and what that's going to look like. But all that was vital to making sure that there wasn't any blockers as we went into the implementation. So again, Tanya, any comments on the phase 0?
Yeah, that was interesting. We called it phase 0. It was all the prerequisite work before the real fun begins. But also part of the planning is just ensuring you are starting as quickly as possible. You don't necessarily have to wait for contract negotiations, et cetera, to be completed while you have some preliminary work that you can start to do. So we're still in kind of finishing up phase 0 and launched phase 1.
Very good. All right, so in review, before we go to Q&A, one of the key things we have out there, begin with the end in mind, making sure we align on the project objectives and expected outcomes, and it's aligned with those strategic intents of the organization, and making sure that all the stakeholders can live with and support those final outcomes of that alignment process. So that's really the foundation, I think, for the selection. And that's also then the foundation that the implementation is built upon as well. So that's really, really vital for success going forward. The next thing you'll see there is business transformation, the what in lieu of the how. we've talked about that several times, and I can't emphasize that enough. In the cloud space, you can't be dictating how something is done. You certainly want to say what needs to be done, but the how you need to be a little flexible on. And in some cases, it may be a bit painful to change. But part of that process is actually the change management around getting from point A to point B is just as much a part of the project, the people side, as the technical side of the implementation. And then the last thing we'd say is partner with experts. There's a lot of folks out there that do selection processes that honestly, they don't know ERP software, and what you're going to get there, is what the vendors give you. I think, having folks with you, and again, I'm not trying to be self-serving to say this is just Avaap, but having people that are with you, that actually have implemented the software on Oracle Cloud, on Workday, on Infor, and can actually, translate a lot of what these packages can bring. And again, all the dirty laundry too. We know where the problems are with each of the software packages, as well as the benefits and the things that they do well. So having that expertise with you is vital, I think, for success as well. So I'll stop there. Tanya, do you want anything else to this, maybe in summary from your perspective before we take questions?
No, I don't think I really have anything to add, Tim. I think you did a great job outlining the review, and completely agree to partner with experts that know this space, and be cognizant of that partnership in picking that process.
Very good. So Melissa, do we have any questions out there for us?
Hey, we sure do, Tim, Tanya. I just want to say thanks to both of you. That was a great session. I know I certainly learned a lot. I thought you said this during the presentation, but one of the first questions we got was, will you share the name of the selected system? So before you answer that, I just want to give a little plug here and just say, for anybody who is interested in learning more and wants to, talk about system selection for their organization, you can send an email to info@avaap.com. I'll make sure it gets to Tim or Tanya. We do have another webinar coming up April 8th. That's going to be led by Avaap's Cameron DeVente and Angelo Mazzocco. They're going to take attendees through some fundamental mindset changes to next generation software selection. So a great follow on to this session. If you're not already registered, you can go ahead and find more details on avaap.com. So if you have questions, please ask them, drop them in the chat. I've got a few here, but we'll start with the one that came in first. Tanya, maybe you want to say it. What system did you end up selecting?
Yeah, that is kind of funny. I'm surprised we didn't mention it throughout this whole presentation, but we did land with Workday. And so far, we're very happy with that selection, not just because we did such a thorough job on the business case and ensuring alignment with everything we were looking for, but so far we're off to a very good start too. So Workday was the vendor of choice that we selected.
Awesome. So as long as I have you in the hot seat here, maybe I could ask you, were there any independent studies that you used to understand the technology vendor?
We did use KLAS. I think, Tim, you mentioned a little bit about KLAS earlier. So if you're familiar with them, is everyone from healthcare on this call, or are these multiple industries? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a large bulk of healthcare. So, but sure, go ahead and explain KLAS if you'd like.
Okay, well, if you're in the healthcare industry, you're probably familiar with KLAS. Then it's focused on healthcare IT, independent assessor. And we did take a look at all of the top vendors we were looking at, both on the software side as well as the implementation partner side. And I think that's where Tim mentioned Avaap was voted best in KLAS recently. And so we did use that tool to help us with customer feedback and overall functionality and satisfaction from the consumer point of view.
And I always
thank you.
I even state, Melissa, that the selection criteria that we established, I mean, when we talk about, one of the sections in there, a big component of that was the KLAS ratings. from each of the vendors. I mean, so that was actually formally part of the rating process. So it's a big deal because that's actual customer feedback, that comes in for each of the vendors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Super exciting. Go ahead, Tanya.
Sorry, I want to say we used some of the similar types of tools too, like Gartner, and looked at their Magic Quadrants and things like that too.
We did.
Perfect. So I mean, staying on this topic, another question that came in for your scoring grid, how were your areas weighted? For example, how much weight did the importance of partnership of the vendor come into play?
Well, actually, I think the scoring tools, when you look at this, I just went back real quick to the slide. Ability to meet requirements was up there at 20 points out of 100, but this is short of showing on a 100-point scale, and I'm pretty sure this is the actual rating scale that we used at LCMC. So again, healthcare credentials is what we were talking about with KLAS and Gartner, that weighed in heavily there. But again, you can sort of see the distinctions that were made. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Tim, you mentioned at the start of the presentation that this is something that people don't do all the time. So, for somebody who maybe is going through the ERP buying process for the first time, selection process, what's something that's typically overlooked or something that they may want to prioritize in the decision making?
Well, I think one thing that's consistently overlooked, in my opinion, is really beginning with that clear vision of where we're going. And I believe that's the foundation for everything we would do in a selection and an implementation. But too often, we come in after the fact, after someone else may have done work at a client, and we find that that's not where they started. They just started pulling things together and putting an RFP out there and letting the vendors tell them what's important. And I think it's more important for LCMC in this case to actually dictate, here's what's important to us, and then actually make that request to the vendors accordingly. So, Tanya, anything you wanted to add to that?
That was perfect.
Okay.
So both of you mentioned, the concept of building with the end in mind, and touching on scalability for a minute, if we could. Are there any indicators to help understand if the ERP solution is able to grow with you?
So I think scalability was a key component, I guess, in the evaluations, because one of the things that this was for LCMC was a transformation, right? So it's not only taking where they're at today, but it's actually re-envisioning where they're going to be in the future. And part of that includes, the addition of, like recently, EastJet was required. I mean, they're coming from PeopleSoft. They have to come onto the system as well. And there probably would be other acquisitions perhaps in the future. I mean, we don't know where that's going to take us, right? So the bottom line is making sure that you have a scalable system that's world-class that can actually not just work at current volumes, but future volumes is certainly a part of this. And I think that comes down when you look at this criteria that's up on the screen right now. Tech architecture is important at the end of the day, because how the system is configured underneath the covers is extremely important on whether you can actually scale and do your business going forward in the future.
All right. Tanya, this is a question that came in for you. Given the variation among your hospitals, can you quantify the amount of configuration and any level of outside customization required to meet business needs?
Sure. So we are still in implementation, so I think the answer won't come till the very end. But as far as our approach, we're going to stick with our strategic intents or guiding principles as much as possible, which of course has that guided autonomy phrase in there. So that will be interesting to navigate what that means and what it doesn't. So from overall perspective, I think our guiding principles are to standardize as much as possible. We certainly want it to be efficient, and seamless and have the same experience as our employees do start to navigate from hospital to hospital. That is one of the goals we want, is to make that a more seamless experience. So we would probably ask the question throughout the implementation is, are we really different? Do we have to be different? Or is it just because that's the way we've always done it? So those are the kind of challenging questions we will ask each other during the implementation.
I think the question ends up becoming during the configuration is how much configuration from, the best practice is required, because there is no customization, just to be clear. So how much additional configuration is required from best practice to meet requirements, right, is really the question.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a good follow-on question, and I couldn't have written it better in this order if I tried. How successful were you at simplifying your universe by using Workday solutions and displacing existing applications?
Excellent question. And I'll have to ask, Tim probably has more stats than I do at my fingertips, but we do have the 3 core implementations that we mentioned. I've got 2 instances of Lawson and 1 instance of PeopleSoft. But I did briefly mention there's a number of third parties that each of those instances uses for a variety of additional features, functions that maybe existing technology can't do. So we have a roadmap of all of the systems that will be replaced through Workday. I want to say it's around a dozen, maybe a little bit more. But things like, this one's probably not a great example because we're working through it right now, but budget software, where we have a third-party tool around budget software. Well, the future, Workday should be able to do that. Today, it's not done within Lawson, which is why we have to go with a third party. But there's, I want to say, around a dozen or more of examples like that. Does that sound right, Tim, as far as how many?
That's exactly right. Yeah, and the dollar figure was actually a little bit shocking of how much that adds up, right, at the end of the day.
Yeah. And people-wise, too. Like resource management wise too, it should hopefully be more efficient with resources to support a standard common platform versus the 24 disparate systems.
So part of the transformation in this case is actually a shared services implementation as well. I mean, some areas are already doing shared services, but I'll take finance as an example. They're very federated right now. So there's an opportunity as we put the system in to actually, implement a shared services model across finance as well. And again, that's just one example. But when you're coming from federated system to working as a system, even with guided autonomy, there's certainly some opportunity to make things more efficient and effective.
I'm going to skip around in the questions, and I'm sorry for those who said, hey, my question should probably be next, but we'll get to it. What current systems is Workday replacing for supply chain and inventory management?
All right, Tim, you can probably chime in too, but at the core, it's in Lawson as our core supply chain software. But again, we have a number of third parties. Right now we're using a system called GHX for some of the standard item master mapping, and specific in the OR, I think we've got a system called Par Excellence. So those would be the core systems that we anticipate will be fully replaced with Workday. Did I miss anything, Tim?
No, I think that was great. I mean, I think there was maybe one other inventory carousel that we had that's going to be replaced as well. But yeah, I mean, really, in going to GHX, it may just be a different utilization, because right now it's being utilized sort of to be the in-between between Epic and the Lawson systems, whereas in the future, its purpose will probably be an EDI clearinghouse. So a different purpose, a different objective going forward. And that's all part of that transformation process.
So going back to the replacement of your budgeting system, was the replacement with adaptive or with core Workday functionality?
So this is the one that I just mentioned. We'll eventually probably land in Workday, but because we were a little bit impatient because we're doing spreadsheets right now, we were a little bit impatient and decided we needed to do something a little better right now. So I think it's adaptive, but it's Kaufman Hall is what we're working
So
on.
let's go in spreadsheets to Kaufman Hall, and then we'll have adaptive in phase 2, which again, that's a little bit of ways. So.
Okay. I got 2 more questions here for you, unless more come in. How long did it take to prepare the RFP and complete the vendor selection process?
So I'm thinking it was a little bit longer than we would have liked, primarily because the pandemic hit in the middle of all of this. So we did have to kind of pause a little bit and then restart and move into a virtual world and how we do this. So it was about a year from start to launch, maybe a little bit less.
Yeah, I think a lot of that time was spent with the business case and such too, right? So, I mean, the RFP itself was pretty quick, but after we did the alignment, but again, once you get all the results and get everybody on the same page, it takes a little time.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And our final question today is about your execution for the rollout plan. Was it big bang or incremental?
So I'm going to say a little bit of both. So overall, it's big bang to get us to what we would call go live. And so all hospitals, all core functionality will go in a big bang, but we will have additional phases after that for back to the continuous optimization or evolution concept. So Tim, you could probably expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think some of the things like talent management, for example, performance is going to be a phase 2. We have what they call people experience in Workday, which is journeys and help would be phase 2. So there's several phase 2 initiatives, but again, 95% of the functionality will be big bang July 1st, 2022, right? Okay, I got the date right.
No pressure.
Well, no pressure, no pressure. Well, hey, that completes the questions that came in today. I want to say, as much as I, appreciate both of you, great job presenting. I also want to say how much we appreciate the people who took an hour out of their day today to spend with us. I hope you found this informative. I hope you learned something new, walked away knowing more than you did when you walked in the call joining us. If you have additional questions, like I said, I'm Melissa Prusher, Vice President Global Marketing of Avaap, melissa.prusher@avaap.com. You can send me a message, info@avaap.com, or go ahead and visit our website. We're going to close out the webinar now. You will see a brief survey. It'll take less than a minute if you can complete it. I would be grateful for it. Tim, Tanya, thank you so much. Appreciate the time and knowledge that you shared with everyone today. I hope you all have a great afternoon. See you next time.
Thank you.